All right, hi everybody. Nice to see you all. My name is Roger, and I am really honored to be here today. Just kind of coming off that last presentation, my style is pretty unique as well. I like to start with dumb questions because I'm really good at making good first impressions. Really quick, hands high in the air, who here knows what it's like to be left out? We're in a circle of trust here, and yeah, so as you kind of look around you, right, you might be wondering why I'm asking this question at this conference, but as you look around you, right, being on the outside looking in is something that is intensely isolating, right? But as you can see from all the hands in the room, it's something that we can all relate to. And that was kind of the aim of what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to talk through a bunch of my own experiences that are deeply personal, but my hope is that you'll be able to glean something that is applicable and relevant to your own careers as well. So, as an Asian American, I've spent my entire life not in, but in between and traversing between two very distinct worlds. I possess the credentials and the knowledge of social customs that allow me to transition between each seamlessly, but at the same time, I've never felt quite like a permanent citizen of either one. Growing up bicultural has given me a really unique perspective on what it means to be not only a recipient, but then also an instigator of culture, much of which I've applied to my journeys within marketing and advertising. So my story actually begins well before I was born. In 1977, a young man named Chang left his family, his home, and his life in Taiwan to pursue greater opportunity in America. And when we think about situations like this, we usually think about the grand lights of New York City or the sunny beaches of California, really diverse destinations known for their opportunity and just a kind of a melting pot of population. And instead, this guy opted for the tumbleweeds of Arlington, Texas. Nothing against Texas, I met the love of my life there, but this was kind of an unconventional choice for Sho, right? This was not a hotbed of Asian culture, to say the least, right, in the 70s. All Sho knew was that it was warm and that they had a great engineering program, and that was enough to convince him to come out here. And he took it all in stride. Right? He rocked out to the oldies station, he feasted on Texas barbecue, and he even fell in love with the strange sport of American football. And by extension, he quickly fell in love with America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. They were a powerhouse in the NFL at the time. They actually won the Super Bowl in '77, the same year that Sho immigrated to the States. One could say that it was fate, and he was crazy about his new favorite team. So much so that 10 years later, almost a decade later, when it was time for he and his wife to deliver their kid, there was only one name that kid could have, and it was the name of Cowboys' legendary quarterback, Roger Staubach. And I've never seen him play. I don't know anything about him besides that he's my namesake. So Sho confidently declared, they were on their way to the hospital. Sho said, let's name him Roger. And at that point, they didn't even know the gender. So his wife asked him, what if it's a girl? Right? Really fair question. Don't worry about it. His name will be Roger. And this is a really silly, endearing example, but I think it speaks volumes about my dad's curiosity and his open-mindedness. He had the courage, I think he could have gone with what he knows and only given his son a Chinese name, but he knew that his kid would not be just Asian, but Asian American. And as such, he wanted me to have a name that would allow me to identify the culture that I'd grow up in. He had the courage to dive into an unfamiliar situation, and it made all the difference in his ability to not only understand that culture, but to impact it as well. So if you look at the state of our industry today, one could say, one argument is that marketers are better equipped than ever, right? We have more data than we could ever analyze. We have access to more tools than we could ever possibly afford. And we have technology that makes behavior like this almost socially acceptable in public. But at the same time, right, if you look at the critiques, you dig a little bit beneath that veneer, right, you see a lot of the same criticisms, and you kind of ask the same questions, like, is our work really getting better? Despite all the resources at our disposal, when you hear people talk about ads, you hear the same old things. You don't even have to read these. To distill them, people are annoyed by us. They actively try to avoid us, or when we do get in front of them, that impression doesn't last very long at all, and they forget about us as soon as they see us. we're regularly criticized in the press for being out of touch with our audience, not really understanding who they are. And perhaps most condemning, right? Even most senior marketers themselves are admitting that they lack the ability to connect with their audiences. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, right? Because we know more than ever about consumers, like this term consumers, but we're still struggling to connect with real people and who these people are at their core. And the truth is, like, we're not going to get any better at it if we're only going to the same resources over and over again. You know, the industry articles, the award-winning case studies, the sterile research reports, or even the business school classrooms. And you know, like, we're all a product of these things. I'm not discrediting any of them, but I'm just saying that if these are the only sources that we're going to, our understanding of people is going to be overly academic, it's going to be sterile, and it's going to be incomplete. And as marketers, we operate in a really unique space, right? It's not like we just have a day job that's isolated from the rest of the world around us, but our job necessitates that we be, you know, very much in tune with the culture and the society around us and how it's working. The only way that we can really understand someone else's world is through this idea of immersion, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about through a few examples from my personal life. So my first lesson about immersion came at a very early age, and sad to say, it was a painful one. I don't remember every little detail, but I remember exactly how I felt. And it was second grade, and it was lunchtime. You guys, for those of you who passed second grade, you know that lunchtime is a very sacred time for a kid, right? It's a little bit of a break in the middle of your day. And I was super excited to sit down and eat with my friends. And as I sat down at the lunch table with them, you know, they all brought pretty typical fare for what you would see any second grader eat back in those times. And meanwhile, I brought a Tupperware container of some pork fried rice that my mom had made. And I was super excited. You know, I love Chinese food. I didn't care that it was lukewarm, that it had been sitting around for a few hours. For me, it was comfort. It was a little piece of home in the midst of my day. I mean, it's not like a tough day, but it's still, you know, like it was a little piece of home in the midst of my day. And you know, the first thing I remember is the kids next to me kind of scooting away, making faces and telling me how strange it smelled. And to be honest, my confidence was shaken, right? Never before that time had I ever felt isolated or ostracized because of who I was, or even worse, wanted to tone down or hide that so that other people would feel more comfortable or wouldn't be offended. I remember that day going home and demanding to my poor mom that she pack me something different for lunch. And soon enough, you know, my food began to resemble theirs. We often hear in Asian culture that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, right? And at the crux of this and what this means, you know, Asians culturally, we're raised and trained to blend in. The collective always comes before the individual, and it's more worthwhile to go with the flow than it is to kind of rock the boat for being different. My gut instinct in that situation was to shrink back and to find the quickest route to acceptance and to act and behave like them so that I wouldn't feel left out. And little did I know it, but years later, that interaction at the lunch table as a young kid would affect how I carried myself at the meeting table as a young adult. You see, in this day and age, you know, it's difficult and sometimes even scary to be different or to stick out, right? Especially in advertising, right? Everyone knows that diversity is an issue, and yet there's this fear that we might be adversely affected if we don't fit in. The irony is that Asian proverb that I shared is something that we see in our working culture far too often. And early on in my career, I often felt an insecurity about my voice. You know, I don't have the biggest personality. I'm not the loudest dude in the room. A lot of times early on, I felt like there's underlying fear that if I spoke out, it'd be kind of like lighting a match in a vacuum, and that I'd be quickly snuffed out by someone who was louder, more opinionated, or just more liked than I was. And I wrestled with this for a long time. And I found salvation in a quote. And I know Samuel L. Jackson didn't say this, but I heard it in this movie for the first time, so I'm going to quote that. So, you know, we are all meant to shine, and as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And this, fundamentally transformed the way I thought about this, because it became not just about me putting myself out there for other people to see and to acknowledge that, but it became about using that presence to empower people around me. So, sticking out is one thing. Just to kind of wrap up this section, sticking out is one thing. It's easy to be weird for the sake of being weird, just so that people take notice of you. But standing out is something that's different entirely, right? Standing out is about owning those differences and owning that uniqueness to empower those around you and inspiring them to be the best versions of themselves. This distinction has helped me better understand the value that my own uniqueness brings to the table and helped me grow a lot more comfortable with this thought. So this next story is about me stepping out on my own. And from a young age, every good Asian kid is taught that they can be anything when they want to grow up, as long as it's one of 4 career options, right? You can be a doctor, you can be an engineer, you can be an accountant, or you can be a disappointment to your family. And if you take into account the context behind this, you compare this to like the other career options that we were presented with, right? Immigrant parents risk a lot of stability and a lot of comfort to provide bigger and better opportunities for their kids, right? And their biggest fear is that they're gonna lay all these foundations only for their kids to throw it away or roll the dice all over again. And I'm standing here in front of you, so you can kind of imagine which route I chose. But like a lot of us, I kind of fell into advertising. I didn't really know much about it to begin with, but I can say that pursuing this passion has given me such a deep sense of fulfillment that just kind of playing it safe never would have. And if we look at our industry, we see a similar tension, right? We cling to a lot of great campaigns as not just suggestions, but almost templates and rules for how we should do things. And a lot of times, we keep using these outdated concepts, even though they're not quite able to replicate the spirit or capture the spirit of the original. And in some circumstances, we can't even recreate the original context surrounding them. Some of these lightning in a bottle situations are kind of once in a lifetime. But each year during the Super Bowl, you see a lot of brands still kind of jockeying for that same status on Twitter. And my point is this: at the end of the day, forging your own path is going to take you so much further than following someone else's. There is value in tradition, there is value in learning from past successes, but at the end of the day, being confined to those methods are only going to get you that far, and maybe not even that much in some cases, right? Our biggest accomplishments lie beyond the horizon of the familiar and the comfortable. So my last story is about legacy, and over the years, I've really changed and kind of shifted the way I process my Asian American identity. Early on in my life, it was kind of like looking through the lens of a microscope. An exercise in intense self-evaluation, kind of picking apart all the different interactions and pieces and thoughts that make me who I am, in an effort to better comprehend just how my brain functions. And now my perspective more recently has kind of shifted outward and forward in a means to understand what my past means for my future. And the shifting point and kind of the inflection for all this has been this little guy right here. So, like any parent, I see a lot of myself in him. And also, like any parent, I'm curious to understand how all the things that I went through are ultimately going to impact and shape his life. My immediate thought, right, when I heard that I was becoming a parent was, I can just give him the blueprint, right? I'm Asian American, he's Asian American, I've grown up Asian American. Like, all he has to do is just kind of listen, and like he's good, he's set, right? But at the end of the day, his world is going to be so different than the one I grew up in. His journey is going to be his own and not mine. It's so easy to get caught up in the hopes and the dreams that I have for him that I have to remind myself it's not ultimately about my opinion or my expertise, but it's ultimately about helping him find his path in the world. And as a strategist, I think a lot of us, me and like just in marketing and advertising, we're trained to have a point of view, right? You got to bring a POV. You don't go into a meeting without having a perspective on what to do, right? The downside is that we get so entrenched in this mentality that our point of view becomes the only one that matters to us. And when this happens, we wind up talking at people and not to them. We ignore their needs or what they actually care about, and in some cases, we even hurt or offend. And the greatest skill that we can develop as marketers, it's not our tools, it's not our opinion, it's not even our intellect, but it's our empathy. This is the difference between us being another loudspeaker that people are just going to tune out, or being able to foster a sense of trust that really forms a deep, profound relationship with these individuals. And at the end of the day, how we make them feel has a much longer lasting impact than how effective our brand or our product is. Instead of selling things to people, we need to focus on making them feel valued and acknowledging the things that are important to them so that they feel empowered. So I look around the room, and I don't want to make snap judgments, but I don't know if everyone here is Asian American. Some of you might be wondering what the application is from this standpoint. And I just wanted to cap this discussion off with a couple takeaways. As marketers, we're all dual citizens, if you think about it, right? There's the world that we inhabit as consumers, but then there's also the ones that we inhabit as professionals. Being able to bridge that gap is a difficult line to toe. We all come from our unique backgrounds. We all come in with biases. But becoming comfortable with immersing ourselves in other cultures is a critically important skill to develop. And some practical ways for us to do this. One, don't just shine for yourself, but shine for others too. For some of us, it's uncomfortable to own the things that make us different. But it's embracing those very same things that gives us so much value, not just for ourselves personally, but for those around us who may be struggling to find their own voice. So find your superpower, but then also use that in ways that helps other people find theirs as well. Secondly, intentionally seek out unconventional destinations. I think a lot of us are conditioned to follow the standards that have been set before us, but this prevents us from discovering what we're fully capable of. There's so much growth and perspective that comes from leaning into the uncomfortable, and I think that's a great way to kind of really figure out what we can be and what we can aspire to be. Lastly, bridge gaps through empathy and not just expertise. Marketing is a business, and our clients' businesses are ones that are ultimately really driven by the bottom line. But success is just as much dependent on our ability to earn the trust of our audiences. Showing that we genuinely understand their values will speak volumes louder than the quality of our products or any other brand's reasons to believe. So that's my talk. I don't know how we're doing on time, but wanted to open this up to a little bit of Q&A if we have the time. 1 minute? We got one question? Yeah.
What took you from Arlington? How did you get from Arlington to Madison Avenue?
My parents moved to California, so pregnancy took me from from Texas to California. I was born and raised in the Bay Area, came out to Chicago for school, and I ended up landing in the great world of advertising. So, yeah.
Did you plan out your path, or did you just let it flow as time went on?
Yeah, I don't think any of this was planned, and there's only so much that you can plan, right? I think there are definitely crossroads where we can all kind of decide, is this what I want to continue pursuing, or is there a deeper passion or a bigger reason to do what I do? And I think that's all a great question that we can continue to ask ourselves and kind of gut check from time to time. But to say that all that was premeditated was definitely not the case. But I think I've learned so much more from that, kind of to Kat's point earlier. So yeah, I don't want to keep this for too long, but I think we can.
What did you name your son?
Oh, my son's name is Eli.
Also a football player.
Also a football player, but that's not the reason why it was easy to spell, so we picked that one. Yeah. Cool. All right, thank you.